Welcome to Vision Plus.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Vision Plus. I'm Bonnie Libhart, and today, if you have started out your year or whenever you are, if you're going through the D's in life, the D, that's it could be debt, divorce. Well, we won't despair. Let's see what all the D words we could think of. Depression, that's right, and all of those things, destitution. You're going to have a way that you can follow, model the person you're going to meet today who's gone through a few of those, as Tony and I have too, and come out, I call it joyful, happy. We're making it. Hey, I woke up this morning, my name was not in the obituaries. It's a good day. When I was over in the Philippines, I said, now what do you guys want me to talk about? And they said, we want to find out how to be happy in this economic downturn. So we did a whole series of programs on how to be happy in the economic downturn. Well, you're going to meet a person today that is doing that. How do we do that? You know, it says, trust in the Lord with all our heart, lean not upon our own understanding, in all our ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct our path. And sometimes we don't like the ditches that He takes us through, and Tony and I have been through tornadoes and accidents, the Indy 500 pace car accident that came down, and, there were 150 of us all together, and about over 20 of us hurt. Tony was the only one to get his neck broken because it was around his old hard head. He got all right. I had lacerations and bruises and so forth. They took him to the hospital. I shouldn't tell this, but since I've started, I will. They took him in a helicopter. Now, I'm looking for my car with 350,000 other cars, and the doctor said to him as the helicopter landed, they took him on a stretcher into Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis. They said, the doctor bent down and said, sir, is there anything you want to tell me before you go in for your surgery? Because his eye was hanging down out of his head. And sometimes his eyes does that even today. But anyway, as he whispered into the doctor's ears, he said, when I left home this morning, in the event I've already started, I have to tell you, in event that my underwear is stitched up and torn apart, I did start out with new, clean underwear this morning. The doctor said, I don't know what we're going to find in there with you, sir, but you're going to come out of this hospital alive. And he did. And that was because he had such a great attitude. But that's one of the things we have to have in all of the D words of life, is this great attitude. And one of the most joyful people that I have recently met, and just have a joy to be around her, is a chaplain of UAH, University of Alabama in Huntsville. She has a lot of other titles I could give her, but we'll just start with that one right now. Welcome, Chaplain Natalie Bernnett.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
She is just a gracious, lovely person to be around, and been through a lot of herself. And she was one of those people that got an idea in mind and went for it and became a multi-millionaire with your business at one time. Tell us about how that started and became.
It started out with deliberation, fear, not quite destitution, all those D words that we mentioned earlier, but it was mainly because of my children. I had 3 children who at that time were about 5, 6, and 9. Funny thing, I was out of a job. I had worked for a major computer, a contender with the IBM 3275 mainframe, and they had gone out of business. And my children didn't care a thing about that. They only cared that they wanted to have 3 square meals and at least 3 more snacks during the day. So I put my thinking cap on, tried to get that gray matter moving around a little bit, and I thought, I wonder if I could start my own business Now, up to this point, I've done a lot of community work. I'd been married and had children. My full-time position at that time had been mostly mother, and then before that I was an executive secretary for Clairol in Chicago. So it took a lot of audacity, really. That's an A word that goes with determination. And that's what I did. I started my own company with $500, and I started a computer services company called Computer Resource Systems, mainly because I knew that if I could live with my own hours, my children would not have to go to daycare. And of course, I did always have a place for them at the office, starting with the conference room, which they were sent to every day after school when I picked them up instead of going to daycare. They came to the office, and after they did their homework, then they did their assigned jobs at Computer Resource Systems too. Well, I never expected it to succeed. I just wanted to acquire and maintain some sort of, I've never been a mediocre type person. I've always been pretty driven. I'm a type A, firstborn child. So if there's a problem, I'm going to try to identify it and figure out the most logical answer for it, and then work out a plan and see myself at the end of that plan. What would I want to do? How do I see myself at the end? And then work backwards. So that's just what I did. I started out with this small computer services company, and my confidence grew, even though I was just about 35 at the time. Not because of my skill with computers, because I knew by then it was a secret that should have been revealed a long time ago. A computer is simply a tool. It is to a carpenter, a computer is to a computer operator just like a hammer is to a carpenter. It's simply a vehicle to be more productive, to use office automation. It's an office automation tool. When they called it a personal computer, they threw everyone off because everyone thought that they were going to treat it like their pocketbook or their briefcase. There's nothing personal about it. It can be very complex, but not if you address it as I did, as simply a tool. Of course, when I was first introduced to a computer, I wanted to run to that river called the Nile. I wanted to be in denial as long as possible, but unfortunately those children were again crying out for food. So I started out with a publisher, 1330 Corporation in Knoxville, Tennessee. And without having met this person, Chris Whittle was his name, he was a whiz kid who started a company based on sole supplier advertising. He called me my second day at the office and said, "Natalie, you don't know me, but I'm Chris Whittle, and I have an idea for a publication. And it's going to be for waiters, waitresses, and bartenders, and it's going to be called Tables Magazine." Now, that's the concept. Remember, I have been out of the workforce for 10 years, and I'm a secretary, having not met this person. He said, now I want you to get this presentation ready for me by tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock, because I'm going to present it to the board of directors at the Hyatt. It was already 3:15 in the afternoon. He was between planes coming back from the Virgin Islands. So I said, "Well, Chris, all I can do is promise to give it my best shot. So talk slow." Well, I called my husband and I said, "Do you remember how to make hot dogs and macaroni and cheese?" And he said, "Don't worry about it." The next morning, Chris Whittle walked in, and this huge, well, they called it a computer. It was an albatross. It was about the size of a refrigerator. It had a keyboard that faintly resembled an Selectric typewriter, but it didn't have an erasure key or anything like that on there. And the printer was called a Diablo. I knew the devil was there with me all night long. But by the next morning, when he walked in at 6 o'clock, I was able to hand him 16 pages of this, what became a magazine, Tables Magazine. So I had the baptism by fire course in what a computer is and what it does. But after that, I became enchanted with computers because I realized how very they have no insight. They're totally computers. It's garbage in, garbage out. Whatever you give it, it has a mind, but it's all zeros and ones. As soon as I realized that the computer was no longer my enemy, just as a hammer is not an enemy to a carpenter, I used it as an advantage, and I learned everything about it from top to bottom as an operator, and then I went to work as I say, for a major computer company, and then I started CRS. Well, I didn't have any trouble convincing anyone that I knew that a computer was not to be an intimidating factor in their life, and it brought me great joy to share that knowledge with them, and it eliminated that dreaded fear that most everyone in 1987 had of the personal computer that was not at all personal. In fact, one of my first customers was an accountant, and I installed a really nice system, and one accountant was absolutely terrified, I could tell, but he refused to participate in the conversation, or, what can I do for you? And he said, Natalie, would you come into my office? I want to ask you something. And I said, sure. And I went in there and he said, do you get a virus from the keyboard or the monitor? And he was dead serious. That's just how terrifying computers can be. Any new technology is frightening. So and this was a CPA. It was early in the computer age, early in the technology industry. But at any rate, back to my company, I started out with a friend who stayed with me for 6 weeks, and then she flew the coop. My daughter became a secretary for a little while after school. But gradually, I dealt with a lot of government contracts and education.
Well, how did you get some of those first contracts?
I begged. No, I went to the procurement office and I said, "Hi, my name is Natalie. I have a company that provides computer services, and if you need me to, I could probably sell you some product too." And that's exactly what happened. They put me on the bid list. These are for the big customers, not the mom and pop.
Department of Defense.
The Department of Energy. And well, in 1988, the DOE came out with Martin Marietta with a contract that was called AVID, Accelerated Vendor Inventory Delivery. I ended up having a horse named Avid, actually, but the point of it was to eliminate the 1,200 suppliers that they had been using and instead have one sole supplier. Now, when I got the request for proposal, I winced because it was 4 inches high, and I had never written a technical proposal of that magnitude. But for some reason, my faith told me that I was supposed to have this contract. Well, it took me 6 months to respond. That's about how long it took to before the due date. And in the meantime, I was very active with the SBA, and the SBA sent me to Washington, or in Knoxville. The Chamber of Commerce sent me to a meeting there, and I met these incredible people who God put in my path. Dan Kashparenko was a full bird colonel who had just left the Pentagon and retired after a number of years, and some fellows from New Jersey who were logistics specialists, and at any rate, they continued to come into my life, and between this group of us, we responded to and ultimately won the right to supply the government with all of their computer software and services and a lot of hardware for a 2-year period. It was a 2-year, $19.5 million contract, which seemed absolutely outrageous to me at the time. But by then, I was so worn out from being a small business owner that it was just zeros by then. I was not inspired by, I was never motivated by monetary gain. I mean, I really wanted to share this wisdom that I'd acquired. I acquired first knowledge by getting beat up with this monstrosity when I worked for the publishing company, and then I became friends with it, and then I I must say that I took control of that computer. And after learning about it and loving it, I was very anxious to share this technology with everyone. And I won the contract. I beat out, well, 1,199 other suppliers to win the right to supply the government with these products. Well, after 2 years, I was still very busy. I'd increased my staff from 3 to 45. We had moved. I bought a building. The SBA funded it for me. And after a 2-year period, it had already exceeded about $30 million, and they continued to renew it. And I managed to have that contract for 6 years and had revenues in the amount of $82 million, which again, I assure you.
Starting with $500.
$500, yes. And macaroni and cheese and hot dogs, and right. But honestly, the zeros meant nothing. It was such an opportunity for me. That was my ministry at the time. I hired everyone who came through the door I talked to, and I felt like if there was a place for them in that business, that I would bring them on. And so we had a very diverse group of employees, and I was nominated by Martin Marietta as a Small Woman-Owned Business of the Year, and I think it was 1993. I went to Washington, went in the Rose Garden. Bill Clinton was there at the time, so he was actually out that day, but was entertained by high government officials, went to the Pentagon, the Capitol, and was treated as royalty, which honestly, by the time any small business owner will tell you that any crown that is placed upon your head, the closest you'll get to royalty is the Burger King crown, because there's just no time for enjoying your laurels, because there's always something else to do that the next minute. It's being a small business owner is like riding a roller coaster at breakneck speed and not stopping for breaks. Just pauses occasionally, but you never really get off until bam, it's over. And that's not what happened in my case. I managed to grow my business not just with this contract, but with several others. And after an 11-year run, I had garnered over $100 million in business with government, education, small business, and won lots of awards that I can't say that I deserved them, but I certainly did appreciate them. But the joy of it all was learning and having the privilege of working with all these great diversity of employees that I managed to keep on board for as long as I did. And then I left, well...
You're at $100 million. We're not leaving till we find out what happened next. And everything you've said, we could have been saying it, except for the number of employees. We had like 35 started in our garage. And when Tony and I had absolutely no money, $60 to our name, we bought me a pair of shoes that cost $60. It's such a stupid thing. Those shoes hurt me every day I ever wore them. It was like God punished me for using the only money we had for frivolous things. But we grew it to 35 employees, and so other than the zeros at the end, our story could be the same. And so I think a lot of people want to start businesses. Now, fortunately, Tony it was his design so we could get a royalty on it, but what happened with your $100 million business?
Well, it actually grew even past that. What happened was I had written the specs and turned Avid into a program that could be sold to other government contractors. And the government was sending me more business than I knew what to do with. And then the Tennessee Valley Authority put out the same bid that DOE and Martin Marietta had put out before. And it required congressional approval. And I wrote to and won the right to have this $75 million a year, 5-year contract. And one of the requirements was that I have $1 million of inventory on the floor, which seems outrageous, but honestly, I promise you, it's all zeros. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be $1 or $1 million or $10 billion. It's all relative. It's kind of like, it doesn't matter what the purchase price of a car is. It really has everything to do with the terms. If you can get a car for $20,000 with no interest for 5 years, wouldn't you rather have that than a $50,000 car that you have to pay 21% interest for 60 months? It's all a matter of perspective. Well, I won that contract. In the meantime, I won all kinds of other prizes. I was a president of Tennessee Leadership and the Executive Women's Association. I was involved in all kinds of, I think I had like 20, I sat on 20 boards at one time. I was the resident woman at all computer manufacturing boards of directors, the resident woman, because back then I was the only person who had the experience and it wasn't panache, it wasn't courage. After a while I realized that everyone is inspired by one of two things: love or intimidation. Love or intimidation. And I was inspired by, I thought to myself that it was love, but I was living in mortal fear that I was going to go bust, and guess what? My worst fear became reality.
How did that happen? That you went bust with 100 million plus 75 million, 75, oh, I can't even say those zeros. But it's like today, us getting all those, we're $1 trillion, so many $1 trillion in debt. What's a trillion? You know, it's just zeros. But what happened for the bust? I got to hear that.
Easy enough. TVA awarded me the contract on November 1st, and November 30th, they had a budget freeze until the following March. So all of my inventory was aging. It ages the moment that it hits the warehouse floor. And no matter how I begged it to remain current, it didn't. And I let my suppliers down, and one by one I had to let my employees go. It was a heartbreaking experience. And remember, by then I had opened up 2 other offices, one in Chattanooga, Tennessee, another one in Johnson City, Tennessee. So I had a lot of employees, and I was heartbroken, not because of the money thing. I promise you, if you want to be a small business person, you cannot be motivated by money. It has to be by love or fear. Because as I once, toward the end of my business, I was invited to come to Washington to give a speech to the SBA, to the winners of the SBA subcontractors of the year.
We were one of those people.
Oh, you were? It was exciting, wasn't it? Well, the name of my presentation was "There's Got to Be a Pony in Here Somewhere." And you may wonder what I'm talking about. It's like this. I consider myself an optimist, but there's no denying that there are pessimists out there too. To prove the point, a psychologist brought in 2 8-year-old boys, and he filled 2 rooms up with unique commodities. The first one was filled up with every toy imaginable that an 8-year-old child would love to play with. And the second room was filled with, nearly to the ceiling, with the excrement left by some animal. So the first boy went in. Johnny went into the room with all the toys, and after 30 minutes, the therapist went in with all of his team and said, "Johnny, what are you crying about? Look around you. There's everything in the world an 8-year-old child could possibly want. What's wrong?" "Oh gosh," he said, "there's so much here. I just can't head to the bottom of his little feet with poop." And the psychologist said, "Jerry, what are you happy at? Why are you smiling? Look at you, you're covered with poop from head to toe." And he said, "With all this poop, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere."
Yes, that's true. And I'm the one that would have been there digging for the pony. Tony might have been crying on which word I start, but your story is so familiar for small business. And what happened next?
And what happened next was all the suppliers wanted their money, the bank wanted their money. Luckily, I always paid my taxes first. First the taxes, then my employees, and then the suppliers. And one by one, it was like a game of dominoes. Everything started crashing and burning, and I was right in the middle of all of it because my name was on the banknote. So I lost the business, all three of the different offices and all the furniture, fixtures, equipment. We had a horse farm by then. I had to say goodbye to the horses. I did take one dog. My marriage ended because of the business failing. That was one of the major reasons. Luckily, my last child went to college. I did get all three of my kids through the University of Tennessee by then. But I kind of ended up back where I started. It would seem to be that I was right back where I started, but it was nothing like that. I had been so enriched with the privilege of serving and being served with my employees, with the suppliers, with the attorneys, the doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs, as I say. And even though I did throw down my hat and stomp on it a few times, I ultimately did computer consulting, and I realized I don't know at what point, sometime around 2000, that the reason all the doors were shutting for me and that there were no multi-million-dollar contracts coming along anymore was that God had decided I was going to be in the ministry. So
she reinvented herself and redeemed herself. And so I know we're going to have to do another program, but in the meantime, back at the ranch, she reinvented herself, went to Sewanee at University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, and became a chaplain. So I just took the next hour and put it in 30 seconds. But you could go to the University of Alabama in Huntsville and see Chaplain Natalie Bernnett.
Only I'm not called a chaplain there because it's a state university. I am the campus minister, and the Campus Ministry Association is comprised of a board of directors of local ministers and churches in the area who contribute funds for my salary and for the programs and events that I plan throughout the year for the students. So instead of having a church, I have a congregation of 10,000 students plus faculty, staff, and administration at the University of Alabama, and I just am delightfully happy being here and thank God for the privilege of serving them. It's not that much different than being in small business, actually. When it all comes down to the essence of it, it's faith, love, courage, and most of all, living by the golden rule. It can be the most enormously fulfilling thing in the world to be a small business person, but there's a lot of pain associated with it, no matter how successful you are. But God didn't promise us that we would not be in pain, but rather that we wouldn't have to be in pain alone. And I never feel alone. I'm an extremely blessed woman, and I'm delighted to be here today and share these thoughts with you.
Chaplain Natalie Bernnett. Well, she says she's a campus minister instead of chaplain over there. I learned her name as a chaplain. And if you want to know more, she could come and speak to your group, I'm sure, or I'll come and tell her story for her. And I am Bonnie Libhart, along with Chaplain Natalie Bernnett, and talking about how you can reinvent yourself and just keep a smile on your face. There's a pony in here somewhere. And I thank you, Natalie, for coming today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for asking me.
And we're glad you are here, because without you, there would be no reason for us to be here. Bless your heart for watching.